Hi, Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am doing a Q&A video, another great question that was submitted to me that I think would make for a good bhakti video, so I hope that you enjoy it. This question comes from someone. I'm going to let them remain anonymous, but they said this: I am watching your bhakti series and have just finished the fifth video in your Sri Ishopanishad series. How does one surrender? I'm having a difficult time with that, as I'm sure it does not mean to give up. How do we keep going forward in our lives, or trying to get something we want to do that we think would be best for our lives and still surrender to God? Thank you for such a reply. Well, it's a really great question. And in bhakti, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, it's actually impossible to stop acting. He says, in fact, that a wise person comes to understand that the modes of nature, let's call them the forces of material nature, are acting ceaselessly. It's like a river that's always moving. And as long as we're here in the material world, there's no way that we can stop being a part of that movement. And the goal is not to stop being a part of that movement. The goal is to love God. Loving God is something that can happen here, there, or anywhere. And so surrendering is not about trying to get out of the world. Surrendering is not about condemning the world or the forces of material nature. And surrendering is also not about giving up on your worldly life. Really, what it's about, what it's doing is recognizing that the spiritualization of our lives and of anything in the material world occurs when we relate what we are doing back to devotion and loving service to God. It's sort of like, we have fingers on our body, and I just tell my fingers to move. It does it like instantaneously. This is something my guru often points out. So how does that happen? Well, it happens because of forces that I can't comprehend and I can't explain. And I am not, I'm not my hand doing these gestures and these motions, and yet it happens. So similarly, our lives in the material sense are going to keep going on, and we're not always going to fully understand why we're doing the things we're doing or why we get caught up in the different storylines and narratives of our lives. Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita that it's incredibly difficult to understand the laws of karma, what has us acting or doing or being in certain storylines in this world, and so forth. But the important thing that he instructs Arjuna to do throughout the Bhagavad Gita is to remember him in all things that we do. And that as we remember God, slowly our actions in life and all the storylines that we're living become spiritualized. So we have a destiny to fulfill. We have a karmic outcomes that will come to us in this life, and we keep walking forward on the path. And surrendering means that gradually we give over our level of investment, absorption, and attachment, or even obsession with the force of these material storylines. And we gradually, through practice, start to dwell in remembrance of, worship of, love of, thought of, conversation about, singing, bringing everything into our lives more and more to remember God. That's how we actually change the story of our life, and that's how we surrender. It doesn't happen by saying, well, I shouldn't do anything worldly anymore. It happens by gradually letting the more worldly, entangled concerns and storylines dissolve as they become spiritualized, and as our life gradually takes on more of a spiritual storyline. And the spiritual storyline is pretty easy compared to the material stuff. It's fraught with difficulties, but the simple thing about the spiritual storyline is that just like our finger is a part of our body, it serves, if we find our right place in creation, our right place is as a small part of God, that we start thinking about how to serve God. the river keeps carrying us along. We keep doing things, we keep having all sorts of storylines that we're going to participate in with our families and our jobs and money and kids and so many things. But as we go, the more we think about God, the more that we bring God into our lives in Krishna Bhakti. We think about Krishna, sing about Krishna, give food on our altars to Krishna, and bring remembrance of the divine into our everyday lives. The more that remembrance flows into all the storylines, we're going to live all, whether we want to or not. And that's how those storylines transform, and that's how surrender happens. It's not Surrender isn't something you do to go and quit the storylines. It's something that starts changing the nature of the storylines by virtue of practice over a very long period of time, and especially by associating with people who are also trying to do the same thing. The main practices of surrender in Krishna consciousness are going to be hearing about God. They're going to be talking about God, singing about God, chanting about God, and doing so with other people, and paying attention to people who have been in the process of giving their lives and their thoughts and their consciousness over to divinity far longer than we have. When we find those people in community who have been doing that, they slowly have the effect of helping us to turn some corners and let go of some things that we may be prohibiting us from that spiritual growth on a deeper level. So we say in Krishna consciousness, association is everything. Why are we caught up in all the storylines that we are with the desires that we have and the responsibilities in the world that we have? And it's because of our karma. It's because of what we've been choosing to do over many lifetimes. And so because that's the case, we don't have to take a punitive view of ourselves. Oh, how foolish you are, how stupid that you're involved with material things. You should just surrender and give it all up. That's not it at all. Because who can change? It's like trying to change the Titanic. Like gonna take a little bit to turn the momentum of those associations karmically. It's like if you've ever tried to quit drinking caffeine, or if you've ever had an addiction you've had to try to let go of, or an unhealthy habit or behavior. It can be very painful and embarrassing and humiliating how difficult it is to change some of the things about ourselves that are most entrenched and sometimes difficult. So surrender is something that it's not about fixing ourselves to be perfect, and it's not about giving up the world. It's about slowly dwelling on God in practice every day, more and more. And as that happens, that's what surrender means. We're giving over our interests and absorbing our heart and our mind in God, in God's perfect qualities, God's love, God's beauty, God's grace, God's generosity, God's forgiveness, God's tolerance, God's own humility. When we associate with those qualities more and more in our day-to-day lives, then these plot lines that we're living become more and more spiritualized, and that's how the evolution of becoming a servant of God occurs. And that mindset isn't about getting rid of or getting out of or perfecting our fallen, messed up self. All of those would admit more self-interest. Gradually we become more interested in God. The plot lines in the world and the struggles, they start falling off and changing naturally. And even then, we're still met with difficulties, and the point is not to be out of difficulty, but to be a servant. And servants are people who are our pleasure, our happiness is so deeply aligned with service and devotion that we learn to be, as one of the great bhakti prophets and avatars of Krishna, Lord Chaitanya said, the progenitor of bhakti in the West especially, he said, humbler than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. So as we surrender, we also, gradually we it's not that pain or suffering isn't there. It's that, it's just, if God wants me to go through something, then I'm trusting that that's my God. That's my friend. That's the love of my life. Of course, I'm going to go through it for them. And I'm not there. I don't have that level of acceptance and surrender. But it does come, and we find that we're able to be more tolerant and humble. We're more capable of showing more respect to others than demanding any for ourselves, and so forth, over time and through practice. And the surrender requires practice, because for us, it's like, just like you can't naturally love a healthy diet when you've been addicted to an unhealthy one for a long time. So it just naturally takes time to switch the intake to a healthy stream of a spiritual vibration. And when we do that, gradually it starts to replace other things. And so surrender is always a process. And it's the thing is that the beauty of surrender is that it's actually unending. We don't want the surrender process to stop, because that would mean that the joy and the bliss and the love and the relationship would stop. And we want a relationship, not a termination of ourselves or of our beloved. So surrender is an ongoing process. Surrender is part of the description of what bhakti is, of what devotion is to more and more deeply surrender ourselves to the ultimate being, whose capacity for us to surrender to is unlimited. And that means the capacity for God to reciprocate with us in loving exchange, because when we submit ourselves to God, the Bhakti scriptures tell us that God is completely owned and purchased by that. God's like, okay, I'm yours, I surrender. So God surrenders to his devotees. So it's a reciprocal process that's never ending. And the him and the her of it is paradigmatic of lover and beloved, but you don't have to think of it necessarily as just some pure literal male and female. It's lover and beloved. So anyway, okay, well, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for a great question. I hope that this answer gave you some things to think about. To all of my Vaishnav brothers and sisters who may be watching, I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section, especially if there's something I might have missed, or anything that I say comes from the insights and realization of the teachers that I have, especially my Guru Vaisheshika Maharaj. And I would also check out his he has the Bhakti group, which I've put into newsletters before, where you can find more Bhakti community and people to associate with, who aren't as covered over by their own stuff as I am. But hopefully I'm giving some help. All right, take it easy, everyone. Hare Krishna.